So my book is called Worth, and I'll tell you a bit about myself. As I said, my name is Bharti Dhir, and I was born in Uganda. And I was born in Uganda in 1960. So my book is very much written from a child's perspective about the sort of experiences I went through. And when I was born, I was found abandoned on the roadside in Uganda. And basically, I am dual heritage. I'm African Asian. I was adopted by an Indian Punjabi Sikh family subsequently, much to the angst of many relatives and friends who said they shouldn't adopt a girl, never mind a black girl. But my parents went ahead and adopted me. So it starts with a dream that my mum had. My mum was very spiritual. And as I said, she was Punjabi Sikh, but she also embraced Hinduism, and she had a dream from Goddess Lakshmi telling her about me. So at that time, she was pregnant with my other sister. So I've got a sister called Anju who was born in November, and I was actually born in September of the same year. So it confuses a lot of people because they try to make up we're twins, but actually, if you saw me and my sister side by side, you would know we were not twins. My mom was convinced about having me in a dream, and managed to convince my dad that there was a little girl who was coming into the family who was not of the family, not from her stomach, from her womb. And so the story goes that she actually knew the ward I was in. She knew the hospital I was in. She managed to persuade my dad, because when the story of my abandonment came out, my dad actually took her to the hospital, and my mom knew exactly where to go and found me. And subsequently, I was adopted. My story talks about the sexism against girls. It talks about the prejudice against illegitimate children, because remember, this was 60s and people really frowned on that type of thing. It talks about the type of attitudes people had, the superstitions around people adopting children who were like me. So I grew up hearing phrases like, she's got dirty blood, which meant that, and people would predict things like, she's going to bring dishonor on your family because her mum brought dishonor on her family by having an illegitimate child. I grew up really, I would say, although I was adopted, I would say identityless, because I felt I didn't belong to the Asian side and I didn't belong to the African side. And I love the picture that Hay House, the publishers, did of me, because they depicted it as me walking on a journey. And the journey I walked through was just navigating who I was, what I was. And my book is called Worth because for many, many years, I had an extreme lack of self-worth. I compared myself to Asian idea of beauty, and I compared myself to the Western idea of beauty. And I found myself lacking quite a lot. And so worth is essentially about experiences that bring our sense of worth down and experiences that brought my sense of worth up. So my story is about my birth, my adoption. For many years, in fact, my parents actually didn't tell me I was adopted. They used to play this game that I look like my dad. My brothers and sisters look like my dad, or they look like my mom. So it came as quite a shock when I was about 7 years old to find out. I went into my dad's study and I found out I was adopted. And I think that was the start of my whole journey of really trying to recognize who I was and where I belonged in this world. So my story talks about a condition that I developed when I was 8 years old. And I don't know if any of you have heard of it, but it's called epidermolysis bullosa. And it's actually a skin condition where your skin blisters up. So essentially I looked like I'd been burnt, because I had blisters all over. So, I had a sort of like almost a double whammy there: girl, female, black, now epidermolysis bullosa. And, I talk about the sort of prejudice and again the superstitions around epidermolysis bullosa, people rejecting me because they thought they would catch it from me, although it was non-contagion. And I've talked about then in 1972 having to leave Uganda with my family. And I will read you an excerpt of the story of my mum actually being challenged at gunpoint to leave me behind by the Ugandan soldiers because they recognized me as being one of them and did not want me to leave. And my mum actually refused. So I will read you that little excerpt of that later on. But when we came to the UK, we came as refugees and we lived in Greenham Common, which was a refugee camp. And so I talk about sort of living there, what it was like. And then when I was 16 years old, they discovered that I was very ill. I had another condition called lupus, systemic lupus. And so I had the epidermolysis bullosa and I had the lupus. And again, my mum's spirituality, her strength, her courage came through. I've talked about angels and guidance and God in my story, and how my mum was, when I was very, very ill, I'd been in a sort of coma for a couple of weeks, and they'd sort of said to my mum that I was not going to survive, and how she went to an agricultural show, and she was approached by a traveler, a gypsy woman, who told my mum that I was going to survive and that she was going to say some prayers. And miraculously, the following day, I awoke from my coma. And since then, I have been a lot better. My condition, epidermolysis bullosa, I've never had a blister since then. But obviously, I've still got the lupus, but that's largely under control from medication. So and my story ends with me sort of explaining how I feel that I'd been in a wilderness spiritually. I had, had Christian teachings, I'd had Hindu teachings, because the Christian teachings were from a missionary school in Uganda that we attended, and then the Hinduism, and then the Sikhism, and how all those religions sought to explain what I was and who I was and why I had these illnesses. And some of them said it was karma, some of them said it was karma because of something I'd done in my past life that was bad, so I had to have this experience. Some blame my mother and my father for adopting me, saying, well, you shouldn't have brought her in, she's a bad bringer of bad luck. So I'm just talking about all those experiences and the lack of worth that those experiences brought up in me. But then there was experiences where my worth was brought up, and that was through the love of my family, my adoptive family, my brothers, my sisters, my mother, my father, the acceptance, from friends, the people that looked past the illnesses, looked past my color, looked past everything that I represented and accepted me for who I was. And within that, I think I had a spiritual journey where I actually I rejected some of the religious ideology. I started to realize that what was more important for me was having that personal connection and relationship with God. So that is essentially what worth is about. And I thought I'd just read you a little excerpt. And this is from a chapter called Mother's Courage. My mum meant a lot to me. So I really feel like this is a tribute to her. So I'll start by saying, if I find one more cent in these belongings, I promise I'll shoot you dead here and now. The soldier is staring at my brother. Our suitcases are open on the roadside and the soldiers are rifling through my brother's things. 2 cents had fallen out of his clothes and we were praying that the soldiers wouldn't find more. One of the conditions that Idi Amin had imposed when asking Asians to leave the country was that no one could have money in their possession, regardless of the amount. The president believing Asians had exploited Ugandan people enough. They didn't need any excuse when it came to shooting people for stealing, even just cents equivalent to pennies. So we'd been under strict instructions not to travel with any money at all. It was such a tiny amount, just forgotten about and left in a trouser pocket. Surely my brother wouldn't die for that. Asian families heading for Kampala from towns outside were forced out of their cars and onto the roadside while their vehicle and luggage was systematically searched. The soldiers took anything they found for themselves. Some families never even made it to Kampala, and rumors of girls being taken by soldiers, never to be seen again, were rife. Because it was a distinct possibility in some cases, girls were dressed as boys. Some had their hair cut and others had their hair tied in buns with turbans placed on their heads. Either that or they had buns knotted in a handkerchief so they looked like Sikh boys, all so that they wouldn't be abducted, raped and killed. My mother contemplated doing the same to my sisters and me, but changed her mind, believing that if other families ahead of us had already done it and were found out, it might actually be worse for us should we be stopped. We waited in the blistering sun as the search continued. No more coins rolled out, and I was reaching the conclusion that surely they'd let us drive on now. Instead, I realized the soldier's gun was now pointing at my mother, and we were mute with fear. The deafening sound I could hear, merely my heart pulsating in terror. "Leave her here," he ordered, glancing at me briefly. "She's one of us." Time stopped. On the roadside, the heat shimmied and danced in front of us, defying the gravity of our situation, a feeling of dread setting in. "Leave her here." The soldier's eyes were bloodshot and full of hate. My mother kept her gaze lowered, demonstrating her deference. Looking at him directly would have antagonized him further. "But I can't leave her here. She's mine." I stared ahead. From the corner of my eye, I could see his gun still pointing at her chest. I said, "She's one of us. What use could you possibly have for her where you're going?" The soldier's voice was now raised, and he looked as if he was about to step forwards menacingly. Still gazing down, Mum was adamant when she replied, "If we leave with her. I'm not leaving her behind." Mr. M, the taxi driver who was waiting for us to get back in the car so we could continue to Kampala, shot a glance at her. I could see he was alarmed, no doubt wondering if she was mad, arguing with a man who was holding a loaded gun in his hand. He moved quickly to one side to distance himself from us, to make it clear he wasn't one of us. He evidently didn't want to be shot, and certainly not for one little girl. "I said, leave her behind," the soldier repeated. Mum gave him the briefest of looks and lowered her head once more. "Sorry, sir, but I can't do that. She's my child, just like all the others. She's as precious to me as all of my children." He cocked the trigger. No one moved. It was hard to breathe. From the corner of my eye, I saw that Mr. M was wiping his forehead, sweat streaming down his face. All 6 of us were standing on the road in a perfect firing line. My brother, Shankardas, my brother, my 2 sisters, me. My baby brother was in my mother's arms. Suddenly, the soldier laughed. He threw back his head and actually laughed. He lowered his gun, pointing the muzzle of it at the ground. Then came what I took to be a grudging look of respect, or was it admiration? "Okay, you can go. I salute your courage." He nodded to my mother. "Take her and go," he said with a dismissive wave of his hand towards me. "I'll radio ahead to tell my comrades to leave you alone." Thank you," breathed my mother gratefully as she herded us back into the waiting taxi. Mr. M jumped into the driver's seat, still sweating profusely. Yet there was no sense of relief, for all we knew that this soldier could still change his mind, as might the next soldier down the road. Mr. M gave the soldier a nervous smile and edged the car forwards. We all stared ahead resolutely, not daring to make eye contact. Eye contact was dangerous. It showed disrespect and could make any soldier mad and start shooting. As the car picked up speed, still we didn't feel safe. We were waiting for the first bullets to rip into the taxi directed from the soldiers manning the roadblocks we'd just left behind. Sitting behind Mum, I fixed my gaze on the back of her head. I could have asked her, why did the soldiers say I wasn't yours? I knew the answer, of course, but still she had no idea that I'd found out about my adoption. The soldier was referring to my dual heritage, being of African Asian descent. That's why he said I was one of them, referring to my African roots. But maybe now wasn't the time to ask about it. An inner voice said she'd been through enough. And also, I didn't want Mr. M to hear me asking such questions. So that's just a small excerpt from my book. And I just want to end by saying that, you know, my story is as unique as everyone here. And I hope that if you pick up my book, that you will find it an inspiration. Many years, I had a dream about being a mum. I never necessarily had a dream about a partner, maybe because of years of lack of self-worth. And I ended up adopting a child. So now I'm a social worker. I work in child protection, and I'm also a mum. And I'm very proud of my daughter and where I am today. And I just want to say that the essential essence of the book is, you know, if you have lack of self-worth or self-esteem, if you think that you're going through a hard time and it's going to be forever, it's a storm. It's a storm we have to go through. And that storm that I went through actually helped me to value myself and value my life and my place in this world and my place on earth. And these experiences, including the spiritual connection I have with God, have shaped who I am and what I am today. And I want to say thank you to all of you for listening to me and giving me your time. Thank you.